Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the third and final day of the Sri Lanka Investment Forum 2021, the first and the largest virtual investment forum in Asia. To commence proceedings today, please welcome Mr. Dumit Fernando, Chairman of the Colombo Stock Exchange.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to this third day of Invest Sri Lanka 2021, where we hope that we can explain to all of those discerning investors that Sri Lanka is well positioned as Asia's next growth haven, and we have a wonderful lineup of speakers and panelists today to get you closer to that message. Before I get into it, let us quickly recap the first 2 days of this forum. On day one, we had the honor and privilege of the event being inaugurated by His Excellency the President, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, alongside the State Minister for Finance, Capital Markets and State Enterprise Reform, Mr. Nivad Cabral. We also had some interesting sessions on the national policy framework, the economic outlook, the outlook for FDI and capital market investments, as well as several deep dives into capital markets, key sectors, and success stories of many Sri Lankan companies. On day two, we were privileged again to have the sessions inaugurated by the Honorable Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, following which we delved into many interesting and promising topics relevant to the investment landscape in Sri Lanka, namely the port city development. This could be transformational for Colombo and Sri Lanka. We also discussed the government's pandemic management plans. This, of course, is critical in the context of economic revival and post-pandemic investment. Following this, we had some very interesting sector discussions around exports, trade, energy, and agriculture. We also spent quite a bit of time on day two understanding the environment and the investment infrastructure, which included the legal context, the connectivity and infrastructure, logistics, and the human capital available in Sri Lanka. We also had several testimonials and project and company meetings and one-on-ones with investors throughout the first 2 days. Now, coming on to day three, we are once again honored to have this session opened by the Honorable State Minister of Finance, Capital Markets and State Enterprise Reform, Ajit Nivad Cabral. And I will introduce you to him in a moment. Other than that, we have keynote speakers from several important institutions. We have Mr. Alfonso Garcia Mora, who is the Regional Vice President of Asia and the Pacific for the International Finance Corporation. We also have several deep dives on the corporate debt market, on the startup environment, cyber and data protection, and deregulation in Sri Lanka. We also have some very interesting sector deep dives, which will cover sectors such as agriculture, banking, pharmaceutical manufacturing, and the digital economy. We will also have several testimonials and success stories of multinational corporations as well as some very successful local entrepreneurs. So you have a lineup that includes both local and international speakers, local and international companies, and sector deep dives, as well as discussions that will cut across many of the types of things that you as a potential investor would be concerned about. So I hope you find all of these useful. Now, without further ado, let me introduce our keynote speaker for the inauguration. Honorable Ajit Nivad Cabral, Sri Lanka's State Minister of Finance, Capital Markets, and State Enterprise Reforms. He has held this position since August 2020. Prior to this, he was the senior advisor to the Prime Minister on Economic Affairs. And from 2006 to 2015, he spent many years as the governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. During that period, he also functioned as the alternate governor of the International Monetary Fund and also held roles as the chairman of the Southeast Asian Central Banks Board, as well as chairman of the SAARC Central Bank Governors Forum. Mr. Cabral has previously served as a presidential advisor on economic affairs to the president and also held many other government policy and planning related roles. Prior to his work in government, Mr. Cabral came from the private sector. He was a chartered accountant by profession and one of the youngest chartered accountants to qualify in Sri Lanka. He was a consultant to many companies on corporate revival and turnarounds, business planning, and corporate governance. Minister Cabral was an Eisenhower Fellow in the year 2000 and has penned many a book. And it is once again my deep honor and privilege to welcome the Minister Cabral and also make a point that as the chairman of the Stock Exchange, we have had a significant level of interaction with the minister, and his interest in promoting the investment and capital market climate in Sri Lanka has been quite refreshing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fernando. It is my pleasure now to invite the Honorable Nivad Cabral, State Minister of Money and Capital Markets and State Enterprise Reforms, to address you.
Ayubowan everyone. Today is the third day of your conference. I had the pleasure of making a few remarks on the first day, and today, the third day, I think a lot that needs to have been said has already been said. I think the last 3 days, you have had some very exciting discussions on various topics. And when I look at the topics that you have discussed, I think it has been a reach which is very, very significant. You have started with the keynote addresses by the President and the Prime Minister. We have also heard the President's Secretary speaking about charting Sri Lanka's economic trajectory. You have asked the question, why invest now? You have looked at the opportunities in the debt markets. You have found out how you are going to beat the pandemic, improving the ease of doing business, the prospects for tourism, as well as the goals for tourism that we have, agricultural modernization and sustainability. Today, Sri Lanka is reaching out to the world to provide leadership about organic agriculture, the awesome opportunities that are available as a result of that kind of initiative. We've spoken about the logistics. There's huge potential there too. The various logistics that we can be improving, what we can do, 5G, as well as how we could ensure that Sri Lanka can become a commercial hub. We have spoken about the need for human development. I believe that's a very important part of the overall development of a country. How do the people of the country ensure that they are part and parcel of the development process? When our president spoke about people-centric economy, a lot of people didn't realize what it means. But what it means is every single person is interested in the country's development as much as he is interested in his own development. So if his own development is not taken care of, the country's development sometimes doesn't really matter. So that match has to also continue all the time. The ethical aspects of business, sometimes you can make money, but at the cost of some other serious issue. the trade policy that we should have, the market accesses, the infrastructure roadmap. All these were some very, very important topics that we have already discussed. So what does it leave for me to give you on the third day of this very interesting conference? Almost nothing. Very little needs to be said by me. But at the same time, we can think of a few areas which sometimes may look like random thoughts, but still for all may be useful for us to keep in mind at the background so that we can reflect on those areas as we go along our normal business in providing solutions as well as development to Sri Lanka and its people. So I thought I will share with you a few of those thoughts and a few insights which I think may be useful in our way forward as we go on this journey. Number one, I think no one is safe until everyone is safe. That's something that we need to understand. So when we look at the current challenges and we sometimes can be a little selfish that we should be safeguarding ourselves, yes, there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, we got to know that unless everyone is safe, that everyone has protection from the pandemic, that none of us are safe. At various times, otherwise it can surface and be a threat to us as well as to our businesses. So doing everything that we can to ensure that people are all safe all over the world is a necessity, not just an obligation. We have to do that in order to ensure that we can be safe going forward. The second is that global problems and challenges require and demand global solutions and remedies. The magnitude and the scale of the problem has to be accepted and understood. When countries undergo massive challenges or have to be faced with massive challenges of external accounts being threatened, we got to understand that it can affect the entire world. So the world has a responsibility. The global community has a responsibility to ensure that all these countries are also given the necessary protection as well as the support in order to prevent themselves from having additional difficulties and problems. That's why I welcome the move by the International Monetary Fund, where they brought in a new allocation of SDR to all the countries. That SDR valuation is around $650 billion. That's something that we asked for a long time. We said that it must be done. That is the only way that you can kind of give a vaccination for the economies of the world. So across the board, increase in allocations of all the countries would definitely help, and that's something that fortunately has been now looked at positively by the global community, and I welcome that as we go along. The last time it was done was way back in 2009 in response to the global financial crisis, and even at that time it helped a great deal for all the countries to be able to face the difficulties and the challenges much better than otherwise. So that's ensuring that the maxim that global problems need global solutions is being worked out practically on the ground as well. Another one that I should reflect upon today is that sometimes we get confused with the terms loans and investments. When people give loans to rich countries and to the advanced nations, those are generally called investments. But when people give loans to the more lesser developed countries, then those are called loans. I think we need to get that nomenclature right. We got to understand that investments are also debt instruments. In some instances, investments could be capital instruments, but that again is a debt due from the company to the investor. At some stage, it has to be provided back to the investor. So in all instances, any investment has to be looked at in that fashion. So big or small, it doesn't matter. All the countries need investments. US, as one of the richest countries in the world, has investments in their treasuries which are more than $15 trillion. What does that mean? That means people from all over the world have given them loans of that amount of money. But if somebody gives a loan to Sri Lanka, we do have that feeling that it's a loan only. Well, it's not that. There are investments as well. So we need to understand that philosophy and phenomenon so that we don't get mixed up with these terms which sometimes can confuse us. And therefore I thought this occasion might be useful for me to just reflect on that as well. Number 4, we have to get our basics right. We have to get our macro fundamentals right. We have to get our infrastructure right. We have to get our doing business indicators right. Those are the most important factors of any business, of any country's going forward agenda. That is important. If you neglect those, no amount of frills can give us the comfort that Sri Lanka can move forward with agility as well as with confidence. So we have to invest our time, our energy, our expertise in those areas. And that is not only for the government to do. I think it's a partnership that we need to work together with the private sector, with the investing community to ensure that we get that right. If you get that right, you would find that the basics are going to generate a lot more trust as far as the country's economy is concerned. So the investing community will look at how Sri Lanka is dealing with these basics, how Sri Lanka deals with this, our human development, our infrastructure development, our peace and harmony. All those are important factors which ensure that the investment climate remains in the right way so that we can go forward. Fifth, I want to talk about specifically about the port city. The port city could have been anywhere in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has a coastal belt of 1,340 kilometers. Port city is 2.69 square kilometers, which could have been sited at any location within that 1,340 kilometers of coastline. But it was decided that we will put it in Colombo. Why? Because that is where the greatest amount of reach would be got for the country. That is where the greatest amount of support could be provided to the country's economy by having a new area developed in order to highlight the potential of Sri Lanka to the world. We have done that now. That part is now history. The land has been reclaimed, 269 hectares. The law has been passed. It was passed in Parliament a few days ago. The infrastructure is now taking shape. We need to now see that there is a steady inflow of investments that will come in to this area so that it can give a boost to the GDP of our country. When it is at the right place, we would find that Sri Lanka can benefit by at least a new GDP contribution of around $4.5 billion that will support this $80 billion economy in the first few years. And over a period of time, maybe in the next 5-6 years, it can generate as much as $15 billion into the Sri Lanka's GDP. That's what the analysts have told us. So if you can get that right, you would see Sri Lanka's macro fundamentals changing rapidly as well as in a manner that would be very, very significant. So I see the port city, the Hambantota port, as well as the new developments that we are talking about as being key factors in taking Sri Lanka forward over the next few years. So we have an obligation. We have a very great desire to make that happen. It won't just happen unless we really work on that. So I think in the next few years, the port city would provide massive opportunities of employment, of investment, of showcasing Sri Lanka. After all, your story today, your conference today is about showcasing Sri Lanka. This would be a wonderful showcase that we could project to the world about how we are doing business and what we are doing. And I think that would need the support of all who are involved in the Sri Lankan story. So I invite all of you to take a strong look at this and to take a position in the port city, especially our friends from abroad, and I believe they would see some tremendous value being generated for them so that they could come in and take investment positions. There was a fallacy that it is only for the investors of a particular country. I want to here and now dispel that myth that it is not so. We are inviting investors from all over the world. Wherever in the world you are today, please come, look at the potential of the port city, be a part of the port city. It is a part of the growth story of Asia that we don't want you to miss. So please come, be a part of it, and from wherever in the part of the world you are in, we would welcome you with open arms, and we would like you to come and be a part of that great story. Something a little closer home is the next point that I want to talk about, that is about locking down. I know sometimes the clamor for locking down is very strong because of the fact that we see the medical authorities vehemently calling for it. I understand that it is an important message that they are giving. At the same time, we got to reflect on the massive cost it has on an economy. Economies are not designed for locking down. Economies are designed for continuous progress. There is no way that you can stop and restart. When you stop and restart, it would mean there is a massive loss that you have to suffer. Someone has to suffer that loss. In the last 1.5 years, Sri Lanka invested or spent 131 billion rupees on COVID management and COVID control. We had to give moratoriums to the borrowers, which was in the range of about 4,000 billion. A period of 1 year was provided for them to pay back those loans. That was about 30% or 33% of the total loan portfolio of the country that was provided in order to ensure that Sri Lanka's business sectors won't suffer the lockdowns as well as those other difficulties that people encounter when you have a situation of that nature. We also gave loans of around 168 billion rupees at the very concessionary rate of around 4% in order to ensure that people can go about their business thereafter. Now, these were important considerations which we had to manage because of the lockdown. So lockdowns must necessarily be temporary matters. It cannot be for continuous purposes. So I would like to urge that everyone do their business in such a way that they do not in any way disturb the health protocols so that we can go on without locking down. I'm a great proponent that we should balance all these factors. We should balance the medical side with the economic side. And if we can do that, we can continue to face these current challenges in a much more cohesive manner than what we have done. The next point I want to make is that sometimes leaders have to make tough decisions. Fortunately, we have one who can make decisions of that nature. I want to tell you that the same way that President Mahinda Rajapaksa was strong and decisive in taking actions as well as taking decisions to deal with terrorism, as well as infrastructure development, as well as economic growth at the time that he was president, today Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the president, has the same ability to take some tough decisions, to make a change that our country can be a lot more sustainable. It will have challenges. I think, if I may just recount, J.R. Jayawardena, when he was told that the Mahavali should be compressed, when he said that Mahavali should be compressed from 30 years to 6 years, many people said it cannot be done. But he did it. M.R. Mahinda Rajapaksa said that we should face the war and deal with it, and many people said it cannot be done. But it was done. In the same way, today GR, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the president, is saying, let's have organic agriculture. Let's ensure that we have sustainable development. Those are tough challenges, like saying, let's have water for all, let's have 100,000 roads, kilometers to be done. Those are tough challenges, but it needs a solid leadership, and I think we have that. Leaders must not look at the next election only. They must look at the next generation. So Sri Lanka is now looking at the next generation. So let's back that. Let's ensure that we are able to look at the next generation. Make sure that the next generation is a lot more stable than the current generation, so that we can be proud that we have done that, and that's something that I would like to urge all of you to be searching for as well. So what are we aiming for? With all the discussions that you have had, I'm sure you have also thought about this, we need to have a 6.5% growth at least over the next few years. It's a tough call. I'm not in any way saying it's going to be easy. It's going to be tough, but we all need to put our shoulders to the wheel. If we do that, I'm sure we can achieve that kind of a growth. I remember when we originally said we would want to have 8% growth, many people thought it cannot be done. Sri Lanka, no, it can't be done. Sri Lanka is used to only 3% growth. But we changed that. People said you can't have single-digit inflation in this country. We changed that. Today, for the last 10 years, we have had single-digit inflation. People said we cannot have single-digit interest rates. I remember when I was a kid, we used to be looking at 20% interest rates for deposits. So you can just imagine how tough it would have been for businesses. As a young accountant, I remember doing feasibility studies, which assumed a rupee depreciation of 10% and interest rates of 20%. How on earth those projects were viable, I don't know. But today's context, you know, those cannot be viable. So we got to ensure that those macro fundamentals are looked at carefully, and all need to support that. People who are doing business also have an interest in ensuring that the macro fundamentals are at stable levels. So that's something that I would urge all of you to support the government, and for the governmental authorities also to do their best to ensure that that happens. Invite investment. That's what we are looking at. Every year, at least 3 to 4% of our GDP should come in from outside to match that gap that we have in investment. If you want to have 6.5 to 7% growth, you need to have investment to match that. So for that purpose, the gap that we have in investment must be also looked at very positively, and then we got to work towards that. Infrastructure development will be something that the government will give very close attention. Poverty alleviation will be another area. We have a task force specifically appointed by the President to look at poverty alleviation as a task, and we are working on that carefully to see that the first principle of our country should be that all must benefit by the development activities that are taking shape. We need to have the GDP per capita increase into at least $7,500. We have been stagnating at the 4,000 level for too long. Last 7 years, we have been around that range. We need to break free. We need to have an additional boost to take us forward. A new gravitational reaction that can take us beyond that fast. And I'm really looking at that as a very important function of all our ministries. The doing business indicators should also be improved, and we are looking at having at the 25th position in the world by the year 2025. Again, a tough proposition, not easy, but we'll work towards that. And I think if we work diligently, we can get that also going. I know it won't just happen. The same thing was told when we first wanted to go to the markets to issue our first international sovereign bond. People said it cannot be done, but it was done. We had a deposit insurance fund. At that time, people said it cannot be done, but it was done. People said we cannot have a stable rupee because our rupee has been used to depreciation of around 10% per year, but we managed it at less than 2% in a 9-year period each year, which meant that it can be done. When we first talked about 2.5 million tourists, at the time when we were having 400,000 tourists, people scolded us. They said, what on earth are you talking about? But today, nobody is in any way challenging those figures. So, in the next few years, we need to give ourselves some overall goals to aim for. The administration of Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the President, and Mahinda Rajapaksa, the Prime Minister, will have to do certain things and have some overall context as to where we are going, and that has been very clearly enunciated in the President's manifesto. We have seen some new developments which suggest that we can move towards those levels, and I believe we are now moving to those levels. We have given certain promises and kept those. We said that we would have negotiations with certain countries, bring in swaps. That has happened. So the shortfall that we had in foreign exchange as a result of the big beating that tourism took in the last 2 years, we have been able to mitigate to a great extent by ensuring that we have new inflows that support our external account. And I think going forward, we can go with a lot more confidence as we go into the future. We are hoping that we can develop the South-South cooperation a lot more. We are having developing partnerships with India, with Bangladesh, and hopefully within our region. Between all the countries, we should increase our trading abilities, our transactions, our financial transactions, and not only be dependent on dealing in those transactions with the rest of the world only. So I would like to end, my dear friends, by saying sometimes in challenging times, certain windows close. We may get discouraged. That window was closed, so how on earth are we going to get wind or blowing into our room? I can also only tell you that when one window opens, there is always another door that you can open. Sri Lanka is opening a few new doors. Those new doors will provide you with the ability and the opportunity of making your investments. We are inviting you. Please come, and from what I have heard on all the areas that you have discussed so far today, there are awesome opportunities for you. We want you to take advantage of it. We want you to be a part and parcel of Sri Lanka's growth story. It is that story that will provide you with the comfort as well as the opportunity of going forward, and that will also mean a lot to the Sri Lankans and to us as a country. So let us work together in partnership, and if we work together, I can assure you that you will benefit, the country will benefit, our people will benefit, and as a region, we'll all benefit. Thank you very much.